This is a story about a young boy named Sam, a student of the University of Port Harcourt, whose life was destroyed by his decision to join the Klansmen Confraternity. At first, he felt proud and invincible, using fear to command respect and intimidate non-cultists. But his false sense of power led him into a violent clash with a rival group, the Vikings Confraternity, a night that ended his life and shattered his family's dreams. The story of Sam begins like that of many young Nigerians whose dreams of a better life are tied to education. He was admitted into the University of Port Harcourt, one of the country's most respected universities, located in Rivers State, a school known for academic excellence, vibrant social life, and, unfortunately, a long history of campus cultism. Sam came from a modest home. His parents were ordinary people who worked hard to give him what they never had, an opportunity to study in a university. When Sam got his admission letter, it was a moment of joy and pride. When he arrived at Uniport, he was full of excitement. The environment was new, the crowded hostels, busy lecture halls, and students from different states and cultures. Everything felt like a new beginning. For the first few weeks, Sam focused on settling down. He attended lectures, made friends, and tried to adjust to life away from home. At this stage, he was still innocent, still driven by the simple dream of graduating and making his parents proud. He spent most evenings reading or chatting with his course mates about classes. He was quiet, humble, and disciplined. But beneath the surface of the campus was another world, one that most students never talk about openly. It was the world of cultism, a hidden network of secret confraternities that thrived on loyalty, secrecy, and violence. Sam began to notice strange patterns around him. Certain students seemed to command respect that others didn't. They walked around fearlessly, spoke with authority, and often carried themselves like they owned the school. People avoided offending them. They were always in groups, and their names were whispered in fear. At first, Sam didn't understand who they were. Later, he learned they were members of different cult groups, organizations like the Klansmen Confraternity, the Vikings, and others. On campus, these groups had existed for years, controlling territories, influencing student elections, and clashing violently with one another from time to time. Still, Sam paid little attention. He came for education, not trouble. But university life changes people, often slowly. As time went by, he started to feel the weight of freedom. There were no parents to monitor him, no curfews, and no one to dictate how he should live. That freedom, while exciting, became the beginning of his distraction. As Sam settled deeper into university life, the transformation in his attitude became more visible. The once humble boy from a modest background began to crave attention and social acceptance. It started subtly, with changes in his dressing, the kind of people he hung around with, and how he began to carry himself around campus. He began to associate with students who had questionable sources of income, boys who always had money, threw loud parties, and attracted admiration from girls and fear from other students. These were the ones who seemed untouchable. No lecturer intimidated them, and no student dared cross their path. Sam was drawn to that kind of power. He began to spend more time with them, often skipping lectures just to be around the group. To outsiders, it looked like he had made new friends, but in reality, he was slowly being initiated into a system of influence and intimidation. One of the things that made these groups appealing to students like Sam was the false image they portrayed. They presented themselves as organizations that defended the weak, protected their members, and stood for equality on campus. Many of them even referred to their confraternities as brotherhoods or families, masking the darker truth behind their operations. Sam didn't know that behind the glamour lay a world of fear, violence, and control. He didn't know that the same people who laughed with him could one day demand blind loyalty, even at the cost of his life. As weeks turned into months, his priorities changed. The excitement of academics faded. He began to miss classes frequently and avoided group assignments. His lecturers noticed the drop in his performance, but like most universities in Nigeria, Few had the time to personally intervene in the lives of students unless the problem became serious. By his second semester, Sam's transformation was complete. He had adopted the behavior of those he once only admired. He began to intimidate others, especially the quiet students who reminded him of his old self. It was as though he was running away from his own innocence, trying to bury it under a mask of toughness. The influence of peer pressure cannot be underestimated. In the university environment, where students are free to make their own choices, many fall into the trap of trying to prove themselves. For Sam, the need to be respected became an obsession. He wanted to be feared. It wasn't long before his friends began to test his loyalty. They would ask him to accompany them for late-night gatherings, sometimes in deserted corners of the campus. These meetings were secret, no phones allowed, no questions asked. The first few times, he attended out of curiosity, but soon, attendance became mandatory. He was told that real men never backed down. He was told that loyalty was everything. And to prove his loyalty, he needed to be tested. That test came one night when he was asked to confront another student who had allegedly disrespected a member of their group. Sam hesitated at first. He had never been in a physical fight before, but the pressure to prove himself was heavy. Backing out would mean weakness, and in their world, weakness was unforgivable. That night marked a new beginning for him, not a beginning of success, but one of destruction. He had crossed the line from curiosity to participation. From that moment, his journey into darkness accelerated. He started to spend more time with the group, missing family calls, ignoring his parents' advice, and living a double life, one that looked glamorous on the outside but was consuming him from within. Sam had no idea that he was walking toward a future that would end in tragedy. The third chapter of Sam's journey marked the point of no return. It was the period when curiosity became commitment, when admiration turned into blind loyalty, and when his identity as a student was overshadowed by his new identity as a member of a secret confraternity. By this time, Sam was already in his second year. He had established himself among the group of young men who roamed the campus confidently, always in clusters. They wore normal clothes, but their presence carried an aura of silent authority. Other students could recognize them, even without them saying a word. The tension they created in their surroundings spoke volumes. The group that Sam became deeply attached to was the Klansmen Confraternity. On campus, the name alone inspired fear. They were known for being organized, strategic, and ruthless when provoked. The Klansmen operated under the pretense of brotherhood, discipline, and loyalty, but underneath, it was a structure of violence, intimidation, and silent control. The decision to join was not something Sam took lightly, at least not at first. He had heard stories of how members were made to pass through brutal initiation rites, how secrecy was demanded, and how one could never leave once fully initiated. But at this point, he had gone too far to step back. His pride, his desire to belong, and his fear of being mocked by those he admired all combined to push him toward the edge. The initiation night came unexpectedly. He received a message through one of the senior members that he was to show his readiness. The phrase was vague, but among cultists, it carried a heavy meaning. It meant his time had come to cross the line. That night, he was taken to a hidden location, far from the hostels, beyond the regular paths students used. It was an abandoned area, shrouded in darkness. There, he met others who were also being initiated. The air was tense, the mood serious, and the rules clear. No one spoke unless told to. The initiation process, though widely known to be brutal, is shrouded in secrecy. Every confraternity has its own methods, all aimed at instilling fear, testing endurance, and binding loyalty through shared pain. For many young men, this process leaves physical and psychological scars that never truly heal. When it was over, Sam had become a new person in the eyes of his peers. They called him brother, welcomed him into their circle, and told him he was now protected. He felt powerful. That sense of belonging was intoxicating. For the first time in his life, he believed he was important, that he was part of something bigger than himself. But what he didn't realize was that he had just surrendered his freedom. Membership in a confraternity is not a badge of honor, it is a chain. From that day onward, Sam could no longer live as he pleased. He had become part of a structure that dictated his movements, his friends, and even his enemies. His behavior on campus changed completely. He no longer feared anyone. He walked with confidence, sometimes arrogance, and looked down on non-cultists as if they were beneath him. He began to intimidate others, just as he had once been intimidated. To him, power had become the only language that mattered. His academics suffered terribly. He missed lectures frequently, stopped submitting assignments, and became notorious among his course mates for his aggression. His lecturers noticed, but many were too afraid to challenge him directly. In some universities, confronting known cult members could be dangerous, even for staff. Outside the classroom, Sam was now involved in operations that extended beyond campus life. Cult groups often had links with street gangs, and members were sometimes used to settle disputes or intimidate rivals. Sam became part of that machinery, the system that thrived on fear and violence. He was no longer the boy who came to the university to build a future. He had become a tool in a cycle of destruction. The Klansmen Confraternity had become his new reality, a dangerous world from which there was no easy escape. He had gained power, but lost peace. He had gained respect through fear, but lost his freedom. Unknowingly, Sam had already stepped onto the road that led to his end. After his initiation into the Klansmen Confraternity, Sam's transformation became complete. He had crossed the boundary that separated ordinary students from those who lived under the dark cloud of cultism. Now, every step he took carried a new level of confidence, even arrogance. He walked around the campus with the assurance of someone untouchable, someone who believed the world should bow to his presence. To outsiders, Sam had arrived. He was no longer the quiet, naive boy from a struggling family. He was now part of the inner circle, feared by many, respected by few, and known by everyone. His name began to circulate across hostels and lecture halls. People whispered it cautiously, attaching it to stories of intimidation and confrontation. The more he was feared, the more he enjoyed it. It was a dangerous kind of satisfaction, one that grew from dominance and intimidation. Sam had learned the art of psychological control. He didn't need to fight anyone to prove his power. His association with the Klansmen was enough to silence even the boldest of students. In the university environment, cult members like Sam often use fear as a weapon. They show up at student union gatherings, confront anyone who speaks against them, and establish influence in social and academic spaces. Some even get involved in student politics, using their networks to control elections and leadership decisions. For Sam, this world became addictive. He loved the feeling of being recognized, saluted, and avoided at the same time. He began to participate in operations, what cult groups often call missions or confrontations meant to assert their dominance or settle scores. These operations could involve intimidating rival groups, collecting tax from students, or disrupting campus events. Each successful mission strengthened Sam's status within the Klansmen. Gradually, his human sensitivity began to fade. Violence no longer shocked him. It became routine. The fear in other students' eyes didn't disturb him. It gave him pride. He had started to lose the ability to differentiate between respect and fear. Off campus, Sam began to attract attention from people who admired his bravery but didn't understand the cost of it. Some students wanted to associate with him just to feel safe. Others distanced themselves completely, afraid that being seen with him might attract trouble. His academics had completely collapsed by now. His results were terrible, and he had become one of those students who remained on campus for years without making real progress. But he didn't care. His focus had shifted from education to domination. To him, books were for the weak. Power was for the bold. Yet, in the midst of his rise in the cult hierarchy, cracks began to form. Rival groups on campus, particularly the Vikings Confraternity, were also growing in influence. The Vikings were known for their aggression, their rivalry with the Klansmen, and their readiness to defend their name at all costs. For years, the two groups had been locked in a silent war, a rivalry that could flare up into violence at any time. Every cultist knew that peace on campus was fragile, a temporary calm before the next clash. Sam was aware of it too, but he had grown numb to the risks. In his mind, he was ready for anything. The Klansmen often held secret meetings at night, planning their next moves and discussing intelligence reports about rival groups. The meetings were intense, full of coded language, oaths, and warnings. Loyalty was everything, and betrayal was punishable by execution. Sam attended these gatherings with pride, sitting among men he considered brothers, never realizing that the same system he served could one day turn against him. There were moments when he caught glimpses of his old self, times when he would see his course mates discussing assignments or hear about someone winning an academic award. Those moments stirred something deep inside him, a faint reminder of the dreams he once had. But each time, he pushed the feeling aside. He had gone too far to look back. At home, his parents noticed the changes. Their once lively son had become distant. He rarely visited, and when he did, his eyes carried a coldness they couldn't understand. The tragedy of cultism is that it replaces love with loyalty, wisdom with arrogance, and hope with fear. Sam was living proof of that transformation. He believed he was rising, but in reality, he was sinking, slowly, steadily, and irreversibly. He had traded his future for a moment of control. And unknown to him, the same false power that made him fearless was preparing him for a violent end. By the time Sam entered what should have been his third year at the University of Port Harcourt, campus life had become a battlefield of silent rivalries. The balance of power among the confraternities was fragile. Beneath the surface calm, there were whispers, warnings, and growing tension between two dominant groups, the Klansmen Confraternity and the Vikings Confraternity. Both groups operated under codes of secrecy and hierarchy, but their rivalry was old and bitter. The Vikings saw themselves as defenders of honor and brotherhood, while the Klansmen viewed themselves as the enforcers of control and dominance. Their history of clashes stretched beyond the walls of the university. It was a nationwide feud that often left blood and fear in its wake. Within the campus, the rivalry expressed itself through intimidation, territorial dominance, and retaliation. Students avoided walking alone at night, especially near isolated lecture halls or deserted paths. Everyone knew that a single provocation could spark chaos. Sam, now a committed member of the Klansmen, was no longer an ordinary participant. He had earned a reputation for boldness. He carried himself like a soldier, always alert, always ready to act. His confidence made him valuable to his group, but it also made him a target. In the world of cultism, visibility is dangerous. The more feared a member becomes, the higher the chances of being hunted by rivals seeking revenge or recognition. Sam had gained that kind of attention. The tension started with small incidents. A Viking member was reportedly harassed by someone believed to be close to the Klansmen. Not long after, a Klansman was attacked in retaliation. Both sides denied involvement, but everyone knew what it meant, a silent declaration of war. Sam was among those chosen to watch over his area. The Klansmen operated like a military unit, each member assigned a role. Some monitored rival movements, others secured the safety of their brothers, and a few were responsible for intelligence gathering. Meetings became more frequent and intense. In those meetings, senior members reminded everyone of their oath, loyalty above all else. They were told that the Vikings were planning something, that no Klansman should move carelessly, and that they must be ready to respond to any threat. For ordinary students, campus life continued as usual: lectures, exams, and social events. But for cult members like Sam, it was a period of constant suspicion. Every movement was watched, every face studied. Trust became rare, and paranoia became normal. Sam's daily routine changed completely. He no longer moved alone. He traveled in groups, even to lectures, always looking over his shoulder. He stopped attending many classes altogether, fearing ambush. His life had become a cycle of fear disguised as courage. At night, he and his group would patrol their supposed territories, making sure no rival stepped into their zone. They used coded language to communicate, and their gatherings were marked by chants, signs, and warnings. The atmosphere was always heavy, a combination of pride, fear, and violence waiting to explode. For many cult members, this was the stage where they began to question their choices. The excitement that once came with belonging was now replaced by anxiety. Sleep became scarce. Every loud sound could mean danger. Every shadow could hide an enemy. The Klansmen were not just a group, they were a chain. Once bound, escape was nearly impossible. Outside the university, cult-related violence was increasing across Nigeria's campuses. Reports of clashes, executions, and abductions appeared frequently in the news. Authorities tried to intervene, but cult groups had evolved, adapting to every crackdown. They became smarter, more secretive, and more ruthless. Within Uniport, everyone could feel the tension building. It wasn't a matter of if there would be a clash, but when. Sam didn't know it yet, but the next confrontation between the Klansmen and the Vikings would not be like the others. It would be the battle that would seal his fate. For now, the university remained deceptively calm, a calm that could shatter at any moment. And when it did, the line between power and demise would vanish forever. The storm that would eventually consume Sam did not come suddenly. It gathered strength gradually, in whispers and warnings that spread through the university like wildfire. By this time, the University of Port Harcourt was no longer just an academic institution. It had become a field of silent warfare. The Klansmen Confraternity and the Vikings Confraternity were both preparing for confrontation. The fragile peace that once existed had dissolved completely. Both sides were on edge, waiting for a single incident to ignite chaos. For weeks, the atmosphere on campus was charged. Students could sense that something was wrong. Movements became restricted. Parties were cancelled. Even night classes, something that used to be common, became rare. Everyone was cautious. Within the Klansmen circle, meetings became intense. Members spoke in low tones about rumors of attacks and executions. Each group suspected the other of plotting a strike. Senior members of the Klansmen warned everyone to stay alert, to move in groups, and to be ready at any time. Sam's position in the group had grown stronger. His fearlessness made him one of the trusted members often assigned to protective duties. But that same boldness also made him restless. He hated waiting. The tension of uncertainty was eating at him. He wanted to act, to defend their name, to prove that the Klansmen were not weak. That mindset was exactly what fueled the danger. The first spark came from an altercation between two students, one believed to be connected to the Vikings and another loosely associated with the Klansmen. What started as a verbal argument quickly escalated into violence. Within hours, news spread that a member of the Vikings had been attacked. In the world of confraternities, retaliation is never delayed. By the next night, a Klansman was found beaten severely near the hostile area. The act sent a message: the Vikings were not backing down. Fear swept across the university. Those who had nothing to do with cultism began to panic. Many students started avoiding classes, and others traveled home, afraid that a full-blown clash was near. The university's security department tried to intervene, but cultists were deeply rooted. They operated in silence, and by the time authorities heard rumors, events had already moved too far. Within the Klansmen, anger boiled. They saw the attack as a direct insult, a challenge to their authority. The higher-ranking members began to plan a counteraction. Meetings were held in secret locations, far from campus. Decisions were made that no one outside their circle would ever know. Sam attended those meetings, Sitting among men who believed violence was the only answer to betrayal. He watched as strategies were drawn, as names were mentioned, and as oaths of retaliation were taken. Each word spoken that night brought him closer to his demise, but he didn't know it. When the date for the retaliation was fixed, Sam was among those chosen to participate. To him, it was an opportunity to prove his loyalty once again. To the group, it was about restoring honor. To the university, it would soon be remembered as one of the darkest nights in its history. The night before the attack, Sam couldn't sleep. Not because of fear, but because of adrenaline. His heart was filled with a mixture of pride and tension. He had convinced himself that this was necessary, that it was part of what it meant to be a man. In his mind, backing down would mean weakness, and weakness was forbidden. The boy who once cared about making his parents proud no longer existed. He had been replaced by a young man consumed by a false sense of loyalty and pride. That night, weapons were gathered, machetes, and locally made toys. The Klansmen prepared for conflict. Every member had a role, and every move had been planned. They were not fighting for survival. They were fighting for revenge. At midnight, they moved in silence, their faces hardened, their hearts cold. The streets around the campus were deserted. In the distance, dogs barked faintly. The university slept. The clash that was coming would not be one of words or warnings. It would be a violent collision of pride, vengeance, and lost humanity. Sam didn't know it yet, but this would be his final night as a Klansman, and as a living man. The battle was approaching, and once it began, there would be no turning back. The night that would end Sam's life arrived like a silent storm, heavy, dark, and merciless. The university campus, usually alive with laughter, music, and conversations, had fallen into an eerie silence. Even the wind seemed to move carefully through the trees, as though aware of the tragedy about to unfold. It was past midnight when the Klansmen Confraternity moved out. Their mission was simple: to retaliate against the Vikings Confraternity for the attack that had left one of their own wounded. They believed they were defending their honor. In truth, they were walking into a cycle of destruction that had no end. Sam was among the front line that night. His face was hard, his steps deliberate. Around him, others whispered in their coded language, communicating instructions and final warnings. The air was thick with tension and anticipation. Some of them carried axes. Others had locally made toys hidden beneath their jackets. They moved like shadows through the dimly lit paths of the university. Every sound felt louder in the silence: the crunch of gravel, the rustle of leaves, the distant hum of generators. The campus had become a battleground waiting for an explosion. Their target was a location believed to be a Viking hideout near one of the off-campus lodges. It was a place known for gatherings and late-night activities. The Klansmen approached it strategically, spreading out to cover all possible escape routes. Their movements were swift and practiced. This was not their first time. The first confrontation happened in seconds. Shouting broke out, followed by the sound of metal clashing against metal. The peace of the night shattered. Students who lived nearby woke up to screams, confusion, and the unmistakable echo of violence. Within minutes, chaos engulfed the area. The Vikings fought back with equal ferocity. What began as a planned attack turned into a full-scale battle. Sam found himself in the middle of it all, running, shouting, fighting, his mind consumed by survival. In those moments, the illusions of brotherhood and loyalty disappeared. There was no unity, no purpose, no victory, only fear and desperation. He saw people he once called brothers fall beside him, their faces twisted in pain. He saw the fire of anger turn into terror as the realization set in that this was no longer a fight for dominance. It was a fight for life. Somewhere amid the chaos, Sam was struck. Whether by a machete or a bullet, no one could say. He fell to the ground, clutching his side, gasping for air. The sounds around him grew distant. Shouts, footsteps, and cries fading into a muffled echo. The same campus that had given him hope was now claiming his life. By the time the university security and police arrived, it was too late. Bodies lay scattered, and the air was filled with the smell of smoke and fear. The attackers had vanished into the darkness, leaving behind destruction and silence. Sam's body was among those found that night. His eyes were open, as if still trying to understand what had gone wrong. The boy who once came to the university with dreams of success had become a victim of the very thing he once admired. News of the clash spread quickly. By morning, the entire campus was in shock. Students whispered his name, lecturers discussed it quietly, and his family received the call that would break them forever. The pain was unbearable, the kind of pain that words could never describe. For the university, it was another reminder of the monster that cultism had become. The administration were alerted, security forces were deployed, and investigations began. But as always, those truly responsible vanished into hiding. For Sam, there was no second chance. His life ended that night, young, wasted, and forgotten by the same system that failed to protect him. The night of blood had claimed yet another dream. And with it, another reminder echoed across the university walls. There is no gain in cultism, only pain, regret. The morning after the clash at the University of Port Harcourt was unlike any other. A thick wave of silence covered the campus, a silence so heavy it seemed to muffle even the rustling of the trees. The sun rose as if uncertain whether it should shine upon the carnage that had unfolded just hours earlier. The school's main gates were guarded by security officers and policemen. Yellow tapes marked the areas where bodies had fallen. Students gathered in small clusters, whispering in disbelief. The events of the night before felt unreal, like a terrible dream that had become all too real. Sam's execution spread quickly across the campus. His name appeared on every student's lips. Some called him that boy who joined Klansmen recently. Others simply said, the new guy who thought cultism was power. His friends from his department couldn't believe it. Just days before, he had laughed with them after lectures, confident and full of energy. Now he was gone. The administration declared a state of emergency. All academic activities were suspended. Students were instructed to vacate the hostels. An official statement described the incident as a cult-related clash that resulted in loss of lives. Behind those cold, bureaucratic words lay human pain that could not be measured. The vice-chancellor, flanked by security officials, addressed the media that afternoon. He condemned the violence, promised justice, and assured that steps would be taken to curb cultism on campus. Yet for many, it was a familiar speech, one they had heard after every tragedy. In truth, the system had become numb. Cult clashes were no longer strange. They were tragic but expected outcomes in many Nigerian universities. Each generation seemed to repeat the same mistakes of those before them. At the University of Port Harcourt, however, the demise of Sam hit differently. He had been young, new, and full of promise, a reminder that cultism was not confined to hardened criminals but could claim anyone who sought belonging in the wrong places. Back on campus, fear ruled. Students avoided going out late. The few who knew Sam personally described him as a bright, ambitious boy who simply lost his way. He had fallen into the illusion of power, the dangerous belief that belonging to a confraternity made one untouchable. The reality was now written in his blood. Sam's story was now a cautionary tale whispered across hostels, classrooms. Some of his classmates found it difficult to focus again. They had seen too much violence, fear. They had realized how fragile life could be within the walls of an institution meant for learning. Sam's name was added to a growing list of young people lost to cult-related violence, names that appeared in reports, memorial services, and anti-cult campaigns. His dreams ended too soon. His downfall became a painful lesson for many. The tragedy had sparked a movement, though small, students, lecturers, and even parents coming together to speak openly against the menace. For Sam, the fight was over. His name now served as a warning. And as the semester dragged on, students often passed the spot where the fight had occurred, whispering prayers and shaking their heads in regret. Life on campus slowly returned to normal, but the memory of that night never truly left. It remained in the silence after lectures, in the empty chair where Sam once sat, and in the quiet fear that it could happen again. Beyond Sam's downfall were many others like him, boys and girls whose names never made headlines, whose stories were buried in silence. Some lived with physical injuries. Others carried emotional trauma for years. One student who had witnessed the night of the clash later dropped out, unable to cope with the nightmares. In interviews conducted later by journalists and researchers, some ex-members admitted that they had joined because they were lonely, bullied, or desperate for influence. Cultism had preyed on their insecurities. Sam's story became a perfect example of how the illusion of belonging can destroy a soul. News of Sam's downfall had made national headlines, and months later, it was still referenced in discussions on student safety and cultism. Universities across Nigeria began revisiting their anti-cult policies. Some introduced mandatory orientation sessions dedicated to warning freshmen about the reality of confraternities. Journalists wrote editorials, educators debated reforms, and parents became more vigilant. His story had transcended the university. It had become a national mirror reflecting the decay of moral values in campuses once built for knowledge. It was agreed that the battle could not be fought by punishment alone. Education, awareness, and emotional support were key. Sam's downfall had sparked dialogue. His life, though short, had left an imprint that no one could erase. This story stands as a stark reminder. There is no glory in cultism. There is no protection in violence. There is no future in destruction. Every student who steps into a university has a choice: to learn, to build, to grow, or to waste it all chasing illusions of power. Sam chose wrongly, and it cost him everything. Let his story echo across every hall of learning. Choose peace. Choose purpose. Choose life. Because in the end, cultism offers nothing but tears and lost dreams.